Welcome to Conversations with the Planets, a podcast that roots the wisdom of the stars into our lived experiences here on Earth and weaves the power of diverse healing modalities together with astrology. And today we are continuing our conversation about essential dignity and assessing how strong a planet is in a birth chart by talking about planets in fall. And we have our good friend Hannah Piper Burns on again, who's been on many of these dignity episodes and a couple other episodes. So yeah, welcome Hannah. Thanks as always for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. I love being here.
We love having you. And then Lori Kaufman and I'm Alicia Cielle Heiser. So we're the hosts of this podcast. And yeah, to just continue our conversation about essential dignity, if you haven't listened to our previous episodes, we've done ones on planets in their own sign, exalted planets, planets in detriment, and now we're talking about planets in fall, which means that they're in the sign opposite from their place of exaltation. And so when you're looking at planets in different signs in the zodiac, the basic theory is that there are certain places in the sky where each planet either is stronger or weaker, which if it's stronger, that means it's more able to carry about its significations in a way that is beneficial for the life of the individual. If you have a strong Venus, you might have really strong relational skills or be really good at working with food or art. If you have a strong Mars, you might be good at asserting yourself and knowing what you want. You might be a really good athlete, things like that. And then when you have planets in signs that are their detriment or fall, which is what we're talking about today, those are signs where the planets tend to struggle a little bit more, and it's harder for them to bring about their significations in the way they would like. So Mars, asserting themselves, making decisions, taking action, is fallen in Cancer, which is a place that's very focused on community and like taking care of the body and things that are just not necessarily what Mars would prefer to be doing. And yeah, I feel like that's kind of a pretty just high level overview of on like fallen planets, assessing the strength of a planet. Do you guys have anything to add about that?
I think it's like going back to the overcultural aspect that we have talked about. It's a lot about how the planet is resourced from the perspective of the values of
Mhm.
where it lives and where it's located, and the kind of surveillance. There's a sort of surveillance and a sort of
Yeah.
inherent othering that often accompanies the expression of that planet.
When it's in detriment or fall, or
Yeah,
in general? Okay.
sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's very similar to planets in detriment, really. Like it's just assessing if the planet has the resources to go about with what it wants to do or if it doesn't. And if it
Yeah.
doesn't, how does it manifest? Like what does it do instead, basically?
And to get at some of that nuance too of like, well, what is the difference between a planet in detriment versus a
Mm-hmm.
planet in fall? When you're looking at fall, it really has to do with lack of visibility because when planets are fallen, they're opposite their place of exaltation, and exalted planets are raised up and given extra energy and extra visibility. And like exaltation can be associated with high reputation and high regard. And so taking that and the opposite of that, where when a planet's fallen, it's like you've fallen off of the pedestal. And so people can't see you. You may not be recognized for your strengths or gifts. Like a Venus in Virgo might be really good at finding little details and like being of service to others and taking care
Mm-hmm.
of all of the little behind the scenes things to like make the logistics work well. And then they're just not really appreciated for the benefit that that brings to the social situation.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is, fallen planets are about lack of visibility. I've heard Austin Coppock talk about it as the places of fall are like kind of like there's like a trap that's there for the planet. And if the planet can figure out what the trap is, like Venus and Virgo might struggle with being too perfectionist and wanting to fix other people when relationally, when
Right.
you're trying to fix people, it's hard to be in relationship with them. But if you can
Yeah.
understand that trap and work with it, then you can, maybe not fall into the trap as much. And
Yeah.
then planets in detriment are really associated with resourcing because planets in domicile in their own planet, in their own sign, have the resources they need to do what they're carried about. So then what they're supposed to be in charge of, they have the resources. So then planets in detriment really don't have any resources. And so there's a bit of a nuance there. Like I would agree that planets in fall also probably don't necessarily have the resources they need, but the resourcing is really, really like comes through, especially with planets in detriment, whereas planets in fall, it's a lot about visibility. But also these nuances are like, you know, there's so many gradients of how they show up in our lives too. This is just the theory.
It's very same but different.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And going off of that, like Venus and Virgo example, yeah, like it can be very picky or particular, but it can also be like a really good thing that you're picky in particular. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's so much nuance of like where that shows up as an annoyance and where it might annoy other people, versus like where it might show up as like actually a really good thing, right? Because that Venus and Virgo is not going to end up with the wrong person because they're very picky. So they ultimately might figure out what it is that they need because of their pickiness, right? They're not going to settle maybe, whereas something else might.
Absolutely. And that's, you know, kind of building off the point Hannah was making about the overcultural thing. And when you have planets that are in signs that are difficult for them, you might actually like that. You might like being just a little countercultural, a little different than what's expected from society.
Totally.
But a lot of times it can come through as society doesn't like you expressing that energy in that way. And so you might be punished externally for having an energy like that.
Even the idea of fallen, you know,
Mhm.
we had real ideas around what a fallen person or a woman was in various points in history, and we have ideas around what a fallen authority figure is, a fallen partner, a fallen man, you know, all of these kind of archetypal energies, and this idea of and when we think about fall, it's like fallen from societal grace and
Yes.
fortune.
It reminds me so much of this project I had to do in high school where we had to like break a societal norm and then write about it. I actually like really loved that project. I still think about it. But we basically had to go in public and do something that wasn't like hurting anyone or anything, obviously, but like we had to do something that made us uncomfortable because it was breaking a societal norm. And then we had to write a whole paper on how that made us feel and why do we even have these societal norms in the first place? And just all these things. And that's kind of what I think of when I think of fallen planets. It's like, yeah, like, sure, you're breaking a societal norm, but like, why was that a norm in the first place? Or like who made these rules? Or
And who do they
why are
benefit?
people exactly like why are people judging you for doing this, basically?
Should we? I'm going to share my screen because I have
Oh yeah.
that table. Here we go. Can you guys see the table?
Yeah.
Sure can.
Awesome. So we'll link to it down below, and it's a table from the astrology podcast about all of the dignity, because what we're doing with this whole series is, you know, there's a lot of nuance with everything that a planet's dealing with based off of the sign it's in, the house it's in, the aspects it makes, whether it's a day chart, night chart, like there's so many different things to consider when you're looking at how a planet really functions in your chart. And so, you know, we've done our episodes, which are also linked down below, on what it looks like for each planet in their domicile or their own sign. We've looked at what it means for each planet in their signs of exaltation. In a few weeks, we'll be releasing episodes on what it means to have planets in their own triplicity or with triplicity strength, as well as planets in their bounds and assessing the bound lord of each planet. And then we've also talking about planets in detriment or adversity. And today we're talking about fallen planets, which in this chart they categorize as depression. So this can just be a really helpful chart to look at, like, okay, I have Saturn and Pisces and, you know, the ninth house talking to my Mars, and like, how can I assess like the dignity of that? And actually Saturn and Pisces would not show up on here because it's not, you know, some places the planets are more neutral, right? So if a planet's not in its own sign, exaltation, fall, or detriment, then it generally is a little bit more neutral unless it has like triplicity or bound strength. So like Saturn in Pisces is not necessarily super strong or super weak. But yeah, should we just go through and start with Saturn and Aries and talk about each of the planets?
Yeah.
Let's get it. Let's do it.
Cool. What do you guys think about Saturn and Aries?
Loud. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a riddle to me a little bit, right? Because Mars exalts in Saturn's home
Mm-hmm.
and Saturn falls in Mars's home. And I feel like we could talk about that alone for like ever. But
Yeah, for sure.
It's
Um,
like, no, you keep going. I'll have
no,
something to say when you're done.
just I wonder if that's a malefic. Is that a malefic thing? Is that a more elemental, or like when we think about, you know, the humors, or like the dry and the wet, you know, I'm trying to sort of like tease out the why, because something that I love
Mhm.
about Hellenistic astrology is that it's so
Like there's a why.
there is a
And
why.
you can
It's
get to the
there.
root.
There's always
Yeah.
a why.
There's always a why.
Well, and it makes me think too, like I took aspect theory from Kelly Surtees, and one thing she talks about with that is that certain aspects can be really good for one planet and not good for another. Like right now we have
Right.
Jupiter and Gemini square Saturn and Pisces, and that really mirrors. I have Jupiter and Sag square Saturn and Pisces in my birth chart, and that aspect is really good for Saturn to have like Jupiter, giving its benefic rays to Saturn. And then it's not a great aspect for Jupiter, that Jupiter has to deal with Saturn, right? Or like a Venus, Saturn, same thing, like that. Good for Saturn, not good for Venus. And so I feel like this is a kind of a similar idea of like Saturn's energy is good for Mars in a certain way, especially the like earthy domain of Capricorn. But then Mars's energy is not necessarily good for Saturn if we're going off of the dignity schema.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Yeah.
why?
Totally. Yeah.
I imagine an elder being dragged along by a child that's like, come on, let's go, let's go, let's go. And the older person is like, oh, I really can't, like,
Mm-hmm.
actually, but I'm sort of being forced to move faster than I really want to.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful image.
I love that too, because I've been thinking a lot about Alicia, I think you're the one who originally said this, but how Saturn is in its home signs for like 6 years back to back because Capricorn and Aquarius are next to each other. And then, so Saturn is like used to being given all resource, right? Saturn is just like fully working. And then it moves into Pisces and all of a sudden it's tired. And that's kind of what we're going through right now, right? With Saturn and Pisces. It's just everybody's sleepy. Everybody's like, ugh, I've already worked. I'm done. I'm exhausted. But then it moves into Aries and it's like, oh, now I have to actually get back to work, don't I? Like it's that like, ugh, okay. Like I guess I'll do this. And then it's almost like you look back and realize that this Pisces energy was almost like a break. But it's hard to look at it like that because it's so tired.
Yeah, and that's really, I mean, I've been dealing with chronic fatigue, like my
Yeah,
own
me
version of
too.
long COVID from my surgery recovery. Like it's not long COVID, but I feel like that's the language our culture has developed around like this chronic fatigue that everyone's experiencing. Because I'm
Sure.
just like so tired from recovering from surgery. And it's a very like, I'm learning a lot about what my Saturn and Pisces is meaning, like is in what she wants. And Chris Brennan in the astrology podcast has noted how he's noticed a lot of influencers and like social media people just talking about how exhausted they are since Saturn moved into Pisces. And I feel like a big part
Yes.
of Saturn and Pisces is lesson is like burnout. Like if you work too much, and especially culturally for us right now, and like I mean all three of us are in the United States in a capitalist culture with a Puritan work ethic where like the amount of money that you can make with 40 hours of work a week has gone down and down and down, and now everyone has like 4 gigs and is like just overworked and exhausted. And then like Saturn in Pisces is just like you're burnt out. There's nothing, you like surrender to that. But then you get to Saturn in Aries and it almost feels like the mania of like, oh shit, I haven't been working, now I have to like
Right.
do too much. And then Aries is like the epitome of burnout energy, you know,
Yeah.
if you push it too much.
Yeah, and I've been finding it really interesting kind of going off on what you're saying about the influencers. But I don't know if you've seen anything about like the whole chaperone situation right now, but she basically made a TikTok video that was like, guys, like the way you're treating me is not normal. And I don't know too much about her whole situation, but she basically just like rose to fame so quickly, like so fast. And then all of a sudden she is like huge, kind of overnight. And she made this video about a week ago where she was just like, hey, like, you can't just come up to me on the street and expect me to take a photo with you. Like, you know, she basically said the thing that everybody else has kept quiet. And I remember, like, when that actual, because I've been getting a bunch of people like stitching it, like talking about it. But I went and finally watched the original video because I was like, what is going on? And I was like, oh my God, I feel like this is what Saturn and Aries is like. We're almost getting a preview of it. Like people finally being like, guys, like I know I'm famous, but I don't owe you my time and energy. Like I can't even go to the grocery store anymore. Like let me figure this out. Let me deal with this because I didn't sign up for this amount of fame. I didn't think it was going to happen. Like, you know, and I was just thinking like that's such a almost like Saturn and Aries preview. Like I feel
It's
like
like
so many
severing.
celebrities, right? Like
Yeah.
so many celebrities are going to be doing that, I think, going forward. Because I've seen a lot of videos. Like Lizzo made a video and was like, "Yeah, guys, this is crazy behavior. I'm on her side." And I was just like, "Wow, like this is really," and like Pluto and Aquarius too. Like this is really a downfall of like
Celebrity
what society
culture.
literally like yeah
Yeah.
it's so society and fame culture and all of those things like
Which is like the exaltation is like the
collapsing.
celebrities,
Yes,
right? And now
right.
it's like we're
Absolutely.
talking about the
The
fall of like it's
fall,
a long way to
yes,
fall from the top.
exactly. Yeah, and I just feel like I mean Saturn is still in Pisces and like I don't
Mm-hmm.
think we've seen too much of it yet, but I think that's a huge preview for what Saturn and Aries is really going to start looking like as we go forward. I think there's just going to be more and more of people just turning on celebrities and people just kind of
Yeah.
pushing that down.
I'd be interested to see. I was thinking about the Saturn and Aries period from like
Hmm.
96 to 98 and then like 98 to 99. And I was like in my early to mid teens at that time, you know, and what the same like was there a dialogue the same way? Of course there wasn't because we didn't have discourse machines the way we do now, but like
Sure.
um interestingly, uh, Aries is my sixth house, and I started doing sports really seriously at that time, which
Hmm.
led to some chronic injuries that I still deal with, like
Mm.
chronic pain
Mm.
from like cross country running in early high school and just like pushing it too hard on cement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and and just like Saturn is consequences. So
Yeah.
often it if it's in fall, like sometimes it's good to have a malefic that's not able to manifest its significations. But sometimes it is about the limitation or the consequence that is brought about by the host's
Yeah.
significations.
And if we're
Yeah,
thinking
for sure.
about the you know, using dignity as a way to understand the planet's potential to impact the life of the being. When a planet's stronger, generally it'll bring about more positive significations for the individual. So if you have a strong Mars or Saturn, like you're still gonna, like, you're probably gonna be a hard worker, really focused. You might, like, you know, Lori's Saturn, she knows she's gonna, like, quitting the Icarian acrobats earlier so that you wouldn't hurt yourself because you had that, whereas a weaker Saturn might have just kept pushing it until you hurt yourself. And so then when you have a Saturn or a Mars in fall, or also detriment, like they're going to continue to show up in your life, but probably in ways that might be even more detrimental or difficult to the life of the individual, rather than potentially
It's
like if you
yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say it's like heeding the warning.
but
Like
Saturn and Aries is probably not going to heed the warning.
exactly. Like there is no heeding of warning.
And then also, Hannah, getting back to your like, well, why does Mars put Saturn in fall when Saturn exalts Mars? I'm also thinking I'm in this Orphic initiation. It's
Oh
like
yeah.
star Orphic initiation taught by Drew Levanti and Kristen Mathis about
So cool.
the Orphic hymns and the ancient like Orphic mystery cults of the Mediterranean. And one of their classes is on it's on Aries or Aries and Chronos, both, and those two hymns, and working with both of the malefics together. And I was actually just catching up on one of their classes on that today. And like if you look at the Orphic hymn to Mars, it binds Mars and it like invokes him and then asks him to like stop the strife, stop the pain, and rather to redirect his energy to like the pleasures of Aphrodite or Dionysus or Demeter. And it's very much like taking in the Saturnian energy of binding Mars and then directing it in an intentional way rather than just like gory bloodshed. And there's this, you know, very ancient view of Mars and Aries that they need to be bound and constricted, which is, you know, where thinking that Mars is exalted in Capricorn could come from. Um, but then the relationship between Saturn and Mars with like Saturn and Aries is very different. You know, it's like stoking the flames of Saturn's energy or something. Or like, I feel like Saturn and Aries is like the people I know in the charts I've seen, like they'll just say no too quickly or else they won't have boundaries. It's like an extreme with boundaries, or, you know, it's just a very different relationship of like back to Hannah's image, like an elder taking their grandkid out and playing with them, but like protecting the grandkid from getting hurt is like Saturn to Mars, whereas, you know, Hannah's energy was like the little grandkid like pulling the elder along and it being like too much for the elder is like Mars to Saturn.
Yeah, I had a good friend who had Saturn in Aries and was basically such an extreme of that. Like just the boundaries were like here or there. Like there was either complete people pleasing or just a strong no without even really hearing it out. And I always like chalked that up to that strong, yeah, like that strong Saturnian energy and intense Capricorn
Fiery.
stellium that's all just like being led back up to that. And it was like, oof. Yeah, it's very fiery. It's very like, I mean, Aries is like that in general. It's very quick to decide. It's very quick to like, I'm gonna do this right now, like it or leave it. But Saturn and Aries, like going back to that like fallen energy, like you're people aren't gonna like that if you do that, right? Like a Mars in Aries might do something quick and rash and be like maybe even like given an award for it or like honored for it or whatever, but like Saturn is gonna be like, no, you can't do that actually. Like that's
like you
breaking a
needed to
rule.
think through the consequences and you
Right.
didn't.
Right. So now here's the consequences of your own actions.
No, much harsher because your Saturn's not very happy.
Exactly.
I'm also thinking of like two people I know in particular who are Capricorn risings with Saturn and Aries, and both of them are like incredible business people and like so successful and like very Capricorn. And it's like astounding, you know, that fallen chart ruler and what they accomplish with being Saturn ruled people. But it's also like to the detriment of their own bodies. Like I feel like Saturn and Aries, especially if Saturn's in charge of your body, if you, you know, have a Saturn ruled ascendant, like you might work really hard to the point where it breaks down your own physical health, and you might accomplish a lot from that, but then again, there still are
Yeah.
consequences from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a
Yeah.
couple people with that combo too. And yeah, it can be hard. Aries in general, like, just because I'm ruled by Aries, I've had those issues too. And I have a lot of other friends who have really strong Aries. It's hard to say no. It's hard to stop. It's hard to know when you need to stop.
Like, know your
Um,
limits.
yeah. And, you know, it's easy to be like, oh, I could probably do that. And then maybe
But
not.
hard work. Mars Saturn is hard work.
Yes, exactly.
And Saturn is dry, right?
Yes, cold and
Mhm.
dry. So it's like the heat of Aries would warm it up, but I feel like it's like maybe too warm.
Too warm.
Well, yeah, I feel like the dryness just like,
Would catch flame.
yeah,
Too
really
dry,
burns
yeah.
up too fast.
Yeah.
Has nothing to hold it back. Because I think all fire signs, to an extent, struggle with uh
Being too hot.
too far, taking it,
Impulse
not knowing,
control.
not knowing the
Sure.
limits.
I mean, fire
Uh,
will just, eat everything in its path.
Yeah, it's
Totally.
hard to stop. Hard to stop once you get going.
Absolutely.
But also, and depending on when you're listening to this episode, we're going to release an episode on triplicity in September of 2024. So this episode on triplicity may or may not have been released by the time you listen to this. But looking at triplicity, Saturn does have triplicity dignity in fire signs. So there is a little bit of saving grace. Like, fire is an external, like diurnal, like going after things and accomplishing and achieving. And Saturn, as a day sect planet, there is something about the energy of fire that, works for Saturn in some ways. So that's something to consider as well.
Yeah.
And if your Saturn was in the we'll also be releasing an episode on bounds in September of 24. And if Saturn's in the late degrees of Aries, then it's also its own bound leader, which might give it a lot more. Like Maternus says that a planet in its own bounds is as strong as a planet in its own sign. So there's ways, maybe Saturn has a really beneficial aspect to Mars, who's the ruler of Aries. There's different ways where like a Saturn in Aries could be mitigated by other factors.
For sure.
Should we do Jupiter?
Let's do it.
Cool. Jupiter and Capricorn. 2020,
I got that.
2008, 1996. Great years. Great years in human history.
Good times.
Now, what do you think about Jupiter and Capricorn, Hannah?
Yeah.
Well, one way that my Jupiter in Capricorn has shown up, it's in the third, which among other significations can mean like pre-college education, what I would consider like pre-college education, the ninth house being like higher education.
Yeah.
Was that I had a fallen mentor in high school. And so I've led some different lives, and I was really into chemistry at this time. I in fact was on a team that competed in chemistry-based events. We were called the Chemathon team. Yep. And I was mostly really into chemistry because I had this really great teacher. And he was very unassuming, like he was very unintimidating and nerdy and bespectacled, and he was really into Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and there were some things that were maybe like not totally appropriate, like you could get on his like email list and he'd send you like funny emails. And I spent a lot of time with him after school, like just the two of us, doing chemistry, like to prepare for these events. And shortly after I graduated, he had an affair with a student who was a minor. And he was like married with two young children, and he ended up going to prison. So that's pretty literal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is.
It is very fallen. And there
So-
are, it's having the conversation about when planets in detriment and fall do things that are countercultural, and sometimes it's good to push the bill on cultural expectations, and sometimes there's a really good reason for cultural expectations, and fall in
Yeah.
detriment planets can also push the bill in really inappropriate or harmful ways.
Fair enough. Fair
Yeah.
enough. I also just had an abundance of mentors in that time, like the Jupiterian more, and just like a lot of like teachers specifically who were like very interested in me and wanted to support me, or
Yeah.
that I had power struggles with. Like I had a lot of
Mm.
investment in that arena of my life.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Jupiter being a significator of mentors in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also feel like Jupiter and Capricorn, I mean, Jupiter currently is in Gemini, which is a sign of detriment, and I have
Mm.
Jupiter in Sag, and I have I have a lot of Jupiter ruled planets, and so it's been really interesting for me to witness like what Jupiter in a sign that it's not comfortable is, and with Jupiter signifying belief, I feel like Jupiter in Capricorn, Gemini, or Virgo is just like a lot more skeptical in general, and with the nativities I've seen of people with Jupiter and Capricorn. And also just being Jupiter and Sag, and then shortly after it moved into Capricorn. So most of my grade, actually Jupiter's in my third house as well. So really influencing my primary school experiences. And most of my grade was Jupiter and Capricorn too. And it's like, there can be a sense of hopelessness in some ways with Jupiter and Capricorn, where it's like everything is really bleak, or like just like very skeptical, nihilistic view on reality.
Yeah.
Like I said, like 2020, Jupiter and Capricorn, the entire world is just like, what the fuck is this, right?
Yeah.
So there's
what's going on?
reasons to be really like bleak or hopeless with Jupiter and Capricorn sometimes, but
Mhm.
it's also like Jupiter and Capricorn is going to be much more like fact
Realistic.
checking.
Mhm.
Realistic fact checking. Capricorn has to do with like old things, Saturn ruled signs are like what's old, what's in the past, and being really obsessed with ancient texts. I know some really amazing astrologers who are very well steeped in the ancient doctrine who have Jupiter and Capricorn, so like
Yeah.
they're going to read things really thoroughly and take a long time to actually come out and like make statements or assessment or analysis off of their research, whereas like Jupiter and Sag might kind of take everything, summarize it, and make this big statement. Like Jupiter and Capricorn's going like to the works cited and then the works cited, and they're going down that rabbit hole to do that deep
Yeah.
like Capricorn type research,
Mhm.
which I actually see a lot of value in, but also
Totally.
very fallen experience of like having to constantly check your facts and never like know what to
Well,
believe in, because like you can take
like-
that too far.
Right. Like it's not fun. It's not like a good time. But
And Jupiter wants to have fun.
right. But
Yeah.
it's gonna be like really amazing at the end of it. Like it's like once you finish your research, once you like show it off, like it's perfect. But yeah, it's gonna take a lot of time and energy and maybe not be a super fun project. And you might experience a lot more people like putting you down or disagreeing with you or arguing it or saying like
Not
or
believing you.
questioning you, not believing you.
Mhm.
Like yeah, like all of those type of things happening. Whereas like Jupiter and Sag might be like, look at what I made. And everyone's like, wow. It's like a very different energy.
Mhm.
I think I've shared the like Santa Claus and the brutalist, like cement brutalist house on the cliff, and he's just like, where's all my stuff? Like nothing, there's nothing here. I can't
Mhm.
like and I'm squeezing through everything. Like all the doorways are like these little tiny rectangles, all the windows are like these little tiny rectangles, and Jupiter's just like, I want to I'm big.
Yeah.
Let me be big.
Yeah, the constraints of Capricorn. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and Capricorn's such a like it's such an internal of Saturn energy. Like it's like let's fit into a box. Let's make sure we're like crossing our T's and dotting our I's and, just making sure that all of the things are correct, basically like fact checking. And so, yeah, it's just like it doesn't want to zoom in, it wants to zoom out.
Mm-hmm.
And people
And
don't really understand why it's zooming in either.
yeah, because Jupiter wants to look at the big
Misunderstood.
picture. It's like Mercury and Saturn can go through the works cited. Jupiter doesn't want to be that.
Yeah. Right.
And then also like thinking through, Jupiter is a benefic planet. And if when we're talking about Saturn, when the malefic planets, Mars or Saturn, are in difficult signs, it makes them more malefic. With the benefic signs, the theory is more that it just limits their ability to bring out about good
Yeah.
in the life of the individual,
Right.
but there's still like Jupiter still is a helper who wants to
Yeah.
bring about good in the ways that Jupiter can. It just would be more muted or limited from how Jupiter would like. And then also Jupiter is a benefic. If it's in Capricorn, then blesses like the Capricorn area of the chart. And if there's other planets in Capricorn, like back to the aspects, if you had Saturn, Jupiter, and Capricorn, that's great for Saturn, not great for Jupiter, right? So Jupiter still like having Jupiter in Capricorn can help out other parts of, like, it might bless your third house if you're Hannah and you have Jupiter in the third. I mean, it also might bring in difficult fallen experiences, as Hannah's spoken about, but I'm sure there's also ways where like the support or like benefit of Jupiter has come through in different ways in like that house topic for you. And so yeah, just thinking about the benefic nature of planets from a theoretical perspective as well.
Well said.
Yeah.
Should we do Mars?
Yeah.
So Mars
Me.
is fallen in Cancer.
I know that one. Yeah, Mars in Cancer. I have actually been thinking about this one all day. Well, I think about Mars a lot because it's very loud in my chart. It's right on my ascendant. And mutual reception to my Aries moon, which is my chart ruler on my MC. So there are just a lot of things kind of making mine even louder. But Mars in Cancer, I've been thinking about how it manifests the most, and it's the ruler of my 10th house and my 5th house. And the funniest thing I could really come up with is that I have always been pretty strong and very athletic, but I'm not always the most graceful, and I'm definitely not like a perfectionist by any means. And so I feel like that's like my Mars in Cancer coming out is that like I'll do this like big complicated skill, but then I'll watch the video back and my toes were not pointed the whole time, or like my feet look ugly, or my knees are bent, or you know what I mean? And it's like I look like a gremlin is doing the the skill. But in my head, it like felt like it went so well. And then those are the moments where like I think that's when my Aquarius placements come in. It's like, let's drill this until we get a pretty aesthetic video of it, right? Pisces Venus. It's like, no, post the aesthetic one. But yeah, my first takes of anything I post on my Instagram, if you saw the videos on my camera roll, my legs are terrible in every single one of them. And I'm like, that's Mars in Cancer.
Yeah, whereas the Venus in Pisces is going to be able to more easily get to the aesthetic place and would help your Mars
Yeah.
in Cancer, but then you still have to deal with the fallen Mars
Right.
to get there.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I should probably do this again until it looks kind of pretty.
The
And
image, oh, keep going.
yeah, no, go ahead.
No, I was going to just bring another like metaphor in. So if you had more to say about that, like finish your thought.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the only other thing I will say is I've gotten some like backlash from it too. Like the just from acro in general, like I've had some things with like my family, like my mom and grandma will say that they won't like my posts because they look dangerous, or like just things like that. I feel like is very like fallen Mars, where it's like this athletic thing, but it looks scary, even though I don't feel like I'm doing anything dangerous. I feel like I am like using precautions or whatever, working up to everything that I do. But there definitely is like a little bit of air of like, it hasn't always gotten the best reaction.
Well, and that's interesting coming from your family, which is such a
Mhm.
Cancer unit.
Right.
You know, like who from society is judging you for these Mars things? It's your family, Cancer.
Yeah. But to be fair, I have never really had like a real job where people would have judged me. Like most of the people I interact with are also acro people, so they're not gonna judge me for doing the thing that they're also doing.
Mhm.
But I have had some moments like outside of family for sure where like I've met some corporate-y type of person and they've been like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Astrology and circus," and they're like, "Okay."
Which is
So,
also very like fallen Mars in your first house, ruling
right.
your moon at the top of the sky, like ruling your 10th house is like your
Yeah,
professional career is not
weird.
typical. It's a weird, yeah, because like fallen planets can just be kind of weird.
Yeah, totally. And I
Mhm.
love it. I actually thrive off of the reactions, especially of like older men who just kind of look at me like, "What are you doing?" I think it's hilarious, but yeah, it definitely gets like really weird reactions from people and just like, why are you doing that? You're doing what? Like that feels very like fallen Mars.
Mm. I see it a lot in reality TV. Like,
Mm.
again, it's not it's not just that they're the one who's crying, because everyone is crying at some point. They're the one who's crying, and everyone else is like, "Oh my God, stop it! Stop crying!" Like you're such a
Mm.
crybaby. Um, and
That's
that's
funny.
like the turn where it's like, again, it's like this planet left to its own devices is fine, like
Hmm.
is fine with the amount that it cries, is like doing its thing, it's processing. It's like
Yeah.
only when other people come in and they're like, what's wrong with you, that
Mhm.
it becomes an issue. um it
Yeah.
also occurs to me that like the lunar, like the when I was in college, we talked about like literary theory and how, a lot of times what we think of as like traditional plot structure where you build to a climax and then the action falls to a conclusion is
Hmm.
very like Martian. It's very like it's like this straight linear narrative. But there are
Yeah.
other narratives that are more like lunar, that are,
Cyclical,
cyclical.
yeah.
So it's almost like Mars wants to have a linear plot line, but it's kind of sucked into a spiral. Um,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
so it's like trying to unbend the spiral and can't.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
even looking at the glyph, right? It's just like Mars is like, let's go. Wee, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I relate so hard to that too, because like there's been so many times where I've like trained a skill and then gotten it, but then had to go a few months without being able to practice it, and then being scared of it again, and then having to
Mhm.
go back and being like, oh my God, like, why am I still working on this? Like, why am
Mm,
I back here? Why am I doing this again? How come I can't diagnose this? Like, it's just so it does feel that way. It can be very like circular. Why am I back? Why am I doing this? Um, and to go along with that, like the crybaby thing, that's so funny. I definitely like I love crying, and I was just talking to somebody about that the other day. Like I that is like the best release in the world. Even if I'm not sad, like I will just be like, yes, like I exclusively only listen to like terribly sad music because I just love it.
And that's, talking about how do you work with these energies, right? Because Mars in
Yeah.
Cancer will like bring difficulty. And so, I mean, Mars will always bring
Yeah.
difficulty. And then when Mars is unhappy, so it's like, how do you remediate that? How do you work with that? And part of it and understanding fallen planets and planets in detriment is just like let them like understand them and let them be how they
Yeah.
want to be, because society
Right.
doesn't want Mars to cry. Like men don't cry, literally, is such a big
Right.
thing. Society might
Yes.
punish you for these things, but astrology can be so liberating when you understand like what the planets in your chart are actually doing and what they need and want, and then giving it to them, like letting yourself be a crybaby. Or another
Right.
way that Lori's really good at remediating her Mars is she's an athlete and she's really active and like an acrobat, right? And if you have difficult Mars energy, like take it on a walk, go work out. Like I used to work
Yeah.
in a homeless shelter and we were really big on de-escalation, and
Mm-hmm.
like the last thing we would do before we'd actually have to start bringing in serious consequences would be like, hey, you need to take a walk.
Yeah.
Like if you're in like a fight in a Mars thing, just like moving, getting activity can be really, really like
Oh yeah.
de-escalating and helpful.
I have so many friends who have joked that you need to take your Lori on a walk. Like people will text me like, "Have you taken a walk today?" I'm like, "I need to." Like, 'cause that is the thing that like clears you.
Like the
Like being in
adrenaline, like
nature.
the Mars,
Yeah.
the cortisol. Yeah.
Yeah, I cannot think straight unless I'm moving a lot of the times. Like sitting is really hard for me for long periods. And that's also Mars on the ascendant too. But yeah, like school was always really hard for me because I didn't care. Like I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to do it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Another metaphor that just like comes to mind when I'm thinking about Mars and Cancer is,
Mhm.
Cancer's the crab. And I feel like
Yes.
there's so many conversations on social media about how crabs in a bucket behave. And I've actually
Yes.
never like looked up a video of this, but apparently if you put a bunch of crabs in a bucket and then
Uh-huh.
any one of them could just climb out and escape. But if
Yeah.
any of them start to climb out, which is the very like Mars thing, like I'm going to go off on my own, I'm going to take control of my situation and take action to like fix my situation, and then all the other crabs will pull the one crab
Yeah.
down, so like they self-imprison themselves as a community
Yep.
and like don't let them assert their individuality. And that just feels so Mars in Cancer, because Cancer is
Yeah.
really, especially like your close community, who are the people that you really care about. And that could be like maybe your close community trying to like hold your self-assertion back in that sort of way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, going back to that whole social norms conversation, it's like people get scared if you break social norms. And who are the people that break social norms? They're people that have a lot of planets in fallen detriment.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Another Hellenistic technique that we've talked about throughout the Dignity series that we haven't talked about yet is you can really see how these planets impact your life when you look at the signs in your birth chart that are ruled by the planets. So if you
I've been meaning to
have
bring that up.
Mars, yeah, if you have Mars in detriment or fall, looking at what house is ruled by Aries in your birth chart and what house is ruled by Scorpio and what are those topics. And those
Yeah.
might be very specifically the areas in your life where more difficult Mars things come through. Or it might even be like the first house in your birth chart is you, but the rest of the chart is your life. So like Lori, I think you'll be okay with me using this example, like
Yeah.
your Aries 10th house, you've had a lot of bad bosses because you have that difficult
Yeah.
Mars, and then the 10th house is the boss.
Yeah.
So that's a way that that energy comes through for you. So always
Right.
looking at the houses ruled by the sign you're talking about to really understand tangibly how this shows up in your life.
Yeah. And also just like for me, it was okay, I need to just work for myself because I can't do this anymore.
Great
So
remediation. Get rid of
yeah,
the
and it has
bosses.
been. Right, literally. Like I keep attracting abusive bosses. No more. So yeah, I think there's so much to be said about just like finding those patterns and then get rid of them.
Or give them a
If you
different way to
can, if
show
you
up.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like yeah, do something different, mitigate it, whatever. But yeah,
Whatever
a
works.
lot of the time you really can, like awareness is key. If you can become aware of the thing that is a problem and why it's a problem, you're more than halfway there already.
And you might even realize it's not a problem, like you're a crybaby and like that's actually not a problem, and cool.
Right. Right.
Like,
Who
Yeah, and
cares?
sometimes you might just
yeah.
have to get in the car and scream and cry. and call it a day. Or go to a concert. You know what I mean? Like it's just sometimes you just need to like allow that. And I think for a lot of years, I was very Aries about it. I was like, no, I don't like crying. And then I was like, you know what? It actually is kind of a nice release and it kind of makes me feel better. And I'm prone to headaches too, Aries. So like that can be something that really I've noticed like loosens up my head. Like it sounds weird, but it feels like when I do have like a crying meltdown, and even sometimes they're for no reason, it makes my head feel lighter. Like I feel like I can just pop back up and be like, okay, that was great. I'm done.
That
It's
makes sense.
out
And
now.
also Mars and Cancer, like
Yeah.
so changeable. Like Cancer's changeable. So it's like cry it out. Like Mars and Scorpio, you're holding on to those emotions forever. But Mars and Cancer, it's like you'll probably get over it in a
Yeah.
little bit. I mean, depending on what it is, but it's like
I mean, usually
the
that is the
tides
case
ebb and
though.
flow.
Yeah. Yeah. Usually if I just like allow myself to have a little like angry meltdown about it, all I need is like 10, 15 minutes. It's gone.
Should
Yeah,
we talk about the sun?
it's can. Yeah,
Sun and
Sun and Libra.
Libra. I mean, from a
I feel
literal
like
perspective,
Mhm,
Libra and Aries are the equinox points, right?
Right.
So when the
mhm,
sun moves into Libra is the fall equinox in the northern hemisphere, and it is when the days get shorter and the sun is literally fallen and losing its strength and moving
yeah.
into a much darker time of year.
And we talked about this in the exaltation episode, but Aries and Libra are the only two masculine active signs that have an exalted or fallen placement. Everything else are the earth and water signs, the feminine, the
Mm.
passive. Um,
Yeah, so Aries is
yeah,
the
and
only, or Libra is the only air sign that puts something in
yes, the only
fall.
air sign and then the only fire sign. And then all of the rest of them are the more,
Earth
I
and
mean, I'm
water.
using
Yeah.
feminine and masculine because that's what the ancient textbooks use, but you know what I mean. Um, but yeah, I think about that a lot with that axis because they are cardinal and they are like so quick to start things and move, and that
Hmm.
does kind of add another layer to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah.
Well, and like the sun, we talked about this in the detriment episode too, but the sun doesn't like being in air signs. Like the sun has
No.
fallen in Aquarius or in detriment in Aquarius. Mercury is stationing direct tomorrow, but Mercury is still very retrograde. So we just
Yeah.
apologize to everyone. But the sun is just not happy in air signs. And especially Libra, it's like Libra's like, does everyone like me? How do I get along with everyone? How does the community impact this? What's fair and balanced and equal and even measured and harmonious? And I mean, the sun actually loves harmony. I mean, Apollo is hugely musical, but like
Sure.
the sun doesn't want to consider if everyone likes them and what's good for the whole community and what's balanced and even keeled. Like the sun just wants to shine.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, and as an Aquarius too, like I really resonate with that. Like it's always like you're gonna just be different. And the sooner that you acknowledge and accept that you just are different and some people are just gonna not like you because they don't like you, like because you're different.
Hmm.
But some people are gonna love you for your differences, and the more authentic you can be within those, the more the right people are gonna find you. And that's a conversation I feel like I have a lot with other Aquarius or Libra sons. And I actually have a lot of friends that are Libras. My best friend's a Libra. And I feel like the thing I hear the most from Libra sons is that they don't get Libra or they don't feel like a Libra. And I don't hear that from Aquarius. Like Aquarius is always like, yeah, I'm an alien. Like, yeah, I'm a weirdo. But Libras, every single Libra I know is like, I'm not that. I'm not like that. I don't like that. I'm not a Libra. And I don't know if that's just a specific brand of Libra that I'm
Well,
attracted.
and that's so interesting with the sun specifically, because the sun is
Right.
like self-knowing and
Right.
like knowing yourself, knowing how to assert yourself and who you
Yes.
are. And then like a fallen sun not fully seeing necessarily,
Yeah.
like,
And
and the sun bringing sight, literally.
Mhm. And I remember back in college when my best friend used to say, "Yeah, I don't relate to Libra." I was like, okay. Like, didn't think anything of it. But then I heard her say it a couple more times throughout the years, and she didn't believe in astrology because of it, because she didn't relate to Libra.
Mm.
But then all of a sudden, one day I started studying astrology and I understood it. And I understood Libra, and I was like, oh, actually, you are a Libra. Like, you are just seeing what society says Libra is, not what Libra actually is. And I feel like that is so fallen sun.
Mm.
Like, to be
Hmm.
that one sign that is like that too. Because, I mean, it's true when you look at Libra qualities that people say when it comes to like very mundane, like sun sign astrology, it's always like, oh, they're the peacekeeper. They're loving. Like, oh my God, they're always chasing after boys. Like, they're boy crazy. You know what I mean? Like, it's those are the qualities that you see over and over. Whereas,
Well, that's like a Venusian, like this idea of
sure,
like being vain or being a
Yeah.
flirt or being like fickle or being like
Hmm.
all of that is a reflection of like
hmm
the like almost the refraction of Venus through the solar
yes,
traits or um like
hmm
uh and also I think it's interesting that this like when I think about Libra, yeah, I think about like the sun on the horizon,
hmm
like melting into the horizon, and so it's like doubled, but it's also like the
mm
sun really wants to like be up high actually
Hmm.
and like
Well,
blaze
in
and
the
not
theme,
melt.
yeah,
absolutely. And in the Thema Mundi chart, which is a
hmm
Cancer rising chart, the sun is at the bottom if it's in Libra. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
literally under
yes,
the horizon, like Egyptian solar philosophy, like Ra is fighting the devils of the underworld, like
yeah,
before they like can ascend back and like be reborn. So it's like, yeah, the bottom of the sky is not where the sun wants to be. The sun wants to be up,
yeah,
you know, high above us, blazing down.
right,
Mm.
yeah, right. It's not happy at the bottom,
Not, you can't see it. The sun
right?
wants to be seen. And Libra is very much like, let's have it be all of us, not like Aries wants to stand out. I mean, Libra can have standout energy, but it is so
Totally.
communal with how it thinks about it too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
well, and I think about that a lot too, is like when it comes to Aquarius and Libra, because they are such similar energies, like those fire signs, like Leo and Aries, like that's the sun, right? The sun is fire. But like, how can a sign, or how can the sun, a planet that is the ego, that is the identity, that is fire, it's literally a ball of fire, how can that express itself in signs that rule communication and other people and community or the partner or others? Like,
mhm.
it can't, like, it just can't feel comfortable there.
Yeah, there's a visibility thing, like you can't stare at the sun, right? You can't really like there's the relationship that you can have with the sun is pretty specific, but
Yes.
Venus wants to have all kinds of relationships and be very relational and be stared at and stare back. And the sun's like, no, it's too much, it'll burn. Or like it's, um, the sun like swallows things
Yeah.
with its brightness. And Venus doesn't Venus that's not Venus's vibe. Venus wants to
Yeah.
connect things.
And like thinking of Venus as the mirror, if you hold a mirror up
Yes,
to the sun, it might start a fire,
that too.
literally.
Great
Right.
point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Anything else about fallen suns?
I don't think so.
Well then, yeah, no, go.
You know, I think Gwyneth Paltrow is a Libra, and I think it's interesting that, like, I'm not gonna make a comment on whether she's like peddling real health or real wellness or whatever, but she's kind of a punchline. Like Goop is kind of a punchline. But I do think it's interesting too, like this, even the idea of goop is so Venusian. Like,
Yeah.
because, you know, it's like connective fluid.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all a very Venusian, like it's a very Venusian marketplace. Like she's had a lot of attention for like vaginal steaming and yoni eggs and things that vagina candle. And it's like, it's not that she's not successful, but she's also kind of seen in society as like a punchline.
I'm thinking of fallen
Interesting,
planets
yeah.
as punchlines is such a good metaphor.
Kim
honestly.
Yeah, I like that a
Kardashian.
lot.
We can talk about her with her fallen, she has a fallen sun and a fallen Venus.
Mm.
And because her whole adult life has been on camera, it's very easy to see it manifesting.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Well, and talk about like mitigation too, like especially things like that. Like, how do you mitigate when it's such a people-pleasing energy, or like when people are gonna talk about it, or it's like gonna be seen even though you don't want it to be seen?
Yeah, there's like a universality that the sun craves that manifests in like Leo's kind of desire to be
Yeah.
everyone's favorite flavor, you know?
Yeah.
And my teacher always talks about how like the Libra journey is like Paris, you know, when he had to make the choice of which goddess is the most beautiful, and he's like, "Can't I just cut the apple into thirds?" And they're
Yeah.
like, "Nope, you gotta choose, and two of us are gonna be pissed off. That's it. That's the way it is." And that's Libra's thing. It's like, well, I don't want to piss anyone off. It's like,
Yeah.
well, if you have to make choices. You have to not be liked by everybody.
Right.
You're not going to be everybody's cup of tea.
Mhm.
And Aquarius revels in that. But Libra
Saturn
kind of,
is the outsider, you know. And sorry, keep going.
well, yeah, and Saturn
Yeah.
exalts in Libra.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would be so many interesting rabbit holes to look at as far as like the sun and Saturn's exaltation and fall being opposite, and you know, other patterns that show up like that in the chart.
Yeah.
Should we move on to
For
Venus
sure.
though? Not go down that rabbit hole.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah,
Venus
in
in Virgo. She's currently in Virgo. I feel like we invoked some of what Venus in Virgo means at the beginning with our examples of like perfectionist
I know.
tendencies and wanting to fix people when it might, you know, people aren't meant to be fixed. I can think of one Venus in Virgo I knew who I was at their house, and we like ate a meal together, and I went into the kitchen to do the dishes, and they were like, "Don't do that. You're not going to do them the way that I like it." And I'm like, and I knew their Venus was in Virgo, and I was like, "You're probably right. I just will not do the dishes." But then they have to do them alone, right? Whereas like Venus, like people doing things together. Um, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you guys think of with Venus in Virgo?
I had an ex that was a Venus in Virgo, and like literally the same story. He hated to cook but loved to clean. And so he would basically go buy food, and then he lived like a street over, and he would be like, "Hey," because I love to cook. But I hate to clean, so it was great. And he would be like, "Hey, if you want to come over and cook this food I just bought, I'll clean it up and we can both eat it." And I was like, sold. Like if I wasn't doing anything, I would just walk over. And I just thought it was so funny because I could just tell like he hated if I touched the dishes afterwards. Like it just because I knew I wouldn't clean it the way he would clean it. like, and that was always like such a big thing, but he also like hated to cook. So he like, it was just such a funny energy, but they're very particular just about the way things are. But yeah, end up doing a lot of things alone because of that, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because it's going to get done the way they want it to get done.
Mhm.
Well, and there's like I mean, I already invoked Kim Kardashian, so I'm just gonna chase that down. But like, I mean, first of
Yeah.
all, like, it's not that she hasn't achieved wealth and fame beyond what most people can even dream of. So like having both a sun and a Venus that are in fall did not hold her back from that. However, when you think about like first of all, just how people react to her name at all, just like, ugh, why is she here? Why is she in this?
Yeah,
Like,
why
why
is
did
she
she
even
get hired?
famous?
Why is she famous? And we talked about that with Paris Hilton too, with a son in detriment. And also like how she
Yeah.
got famous was through like a sex tape being released. Now there's like a lot of controversy about like was it released against her knowledge? Did she consent to the release of it? And that's
Mm,
very fall in Venus,
Like
literally.
scandal, sex
A lot of
scandal,
shame,
yeah.
a lot of scandal. And then
yeah.
also a lot of people like talk about her very disparagingly, and rightfully so, about like beauty standards and how she epitomizes a standard that is like unachievable for most people, and she really like works too hard uh on her appearance and like is
Venus and Virgo
Mm,
working too
Venus and
hard on your
Virgo.
appearance.
And she
yeah.
even was under a lot of fire in an interview where she literally says something like, it seems like no one wants to get up and work anymore. Like, just get up and work. Like, if you want to be successful, you just work. And everyone was like, boo, tomato, tomato, and it's like it again,
Very out of touch.
out of touch. Also, like, yeah, I can't seem to do anything right, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it does, again, hasn't seemed to hold her back.
Yeah.
But it, I mean, and she also has not been very successful in relationships.
Hmm.
And she had a marriage that fell apart in 30 days or something, that was like huge. It was a huge spectacle. And then she married one of the most infamous people in the world. Um, she's had some really tumultuous, really public, really scrutinized relationships.
And,
Yeah.
getting back to the nuance of a fallen planet versus a detriment planet being about reputation and
Yeah.
lack of reputation. And like it's a long way to fall from the top. And Kim Kardashian is such a good example of like a very public figure who does not have a good reputation and for most people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we love to
Yeah.
hate her,
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
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 And so our friend Lila has a fallen Venus, and she jokes all the time. She blames it for a lot of things. She jokes that it's her little handicap. Um, but she's noticed it a lot in her art and in the way that she puts things out in the world. And that's a conversation that me and her have had a lot, where she'll do something that she's really proud of and took a lot of time with, and then she feels like it doesn't get the reaction that she thought it kind of deserved. Or she'll like host something and be like, I wonder why more people didn't show up to this, or like just those type of things. And she's a Leo rising, so it's in her second house too. So it does usually come back to like money isn't really like an issue with her because of like family, but a lot of her art, it's been hard for her to like make money through that art. And like that's what she's wanted to be like known for. And so I think about her a lot with that fallen Venus energy.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
There's also, I'm realizing here that all of the planetary falls, except for Jupiter and then like Mercury, I'm curious why they didn't put Mercury for
I was wondering
adversity
that
and
too.
depression. But so this doesn't apply to Jupiter and Mercury, but it applies to all other 5 traditional planets that all, if they're in their place of fall, they have triplicity strength. And
Yeah.
so Venus being in an earth sign, especially if you have a day chart, then she's the triplicity lord. But regardless, Venus has triplicity strength in earth
Wait.
signs.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true of
I've
Jupiter, though.
Yeah, it's not true for Jupiter or Mercury,
right.
Right.
but it's true for the
for the
other
others.
5. Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So
I
there is
have
something
wondered.
earthy. Oh, go ahead.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, I've wondered if that was part of the reason that Saturn and the Sun are the only 2 in diurnal signs also.
Is some
Mm.
triplicity. Yeah.
Because that does kind of like balance them out a little bit. But
Yeah.
I don't know why Jupiter wouldn't be, so that was the only thing that like has kind of held me back from actually saying something about that thought.
But, you know, thinking about remediation, like one, that's just some extra strength that Venus has. And then if you have Venus in Virgo, or, you know, right now we have transiting Venus in Virgo, connecting to
Mhm.
Earth's energy and the element of Earth can be a way to help soothe that. Like Venus is in her own sign in Taurus. She likes to move slowly. She likes to be very grounded and like, you know, and even thinking about like Venus versus Jupiter and just like so many dignity themes that come through with like the planetary joys and the theme of Mundi is Venus is very much like a below the horizon, like earthly body, like matter type of planet who wants to bring in like very physical things and have very physical experiences, whereas Jupiter is much more of like spirit and mind and like the like air space above the horizon. And so it's like working with earth energy can be a way to help remediate Venus and Virgo.
What if Kim
Yes.
Kardashian was a ceramicist and was like sculpting vessels instead of herself?
But she, you know, she has made a huge impact
question.
on like the physical realm, even though it's been of a
Yes.
fallen
Sure.
nature. Like, you know, she has made a lot of money. She's really made a name for herself, like in a tangible, physical, earthy way.
She has
You know, because
pushed the
Venus is
Overton window
still
on aesthetics too, like
Mhm.
in terms
And like
of
butts are in. Like, thank you,
exactly,
Kardashians. Butts
exactly.
are in. They were not in 20 years ago.
No, they were not.
Yeah, and like Venus, just like when we were talking about Jupiter and Capricorn, Venus wants to help. Like she's less able to help in Virgo than she is in Pisces. Like, you know, the Lila event example, whereas Lori, I imagine when you have events with your Venus and Pisces, you probably have a lot of people show up just because like Venus has the
Yeah.
juice to give that, you know, and so in
Yeah.
Virgo it is. And I also really resonate, Lila, if you're listening, but like my Venus in Scorpio has also had many things where like people just don't come because like Venus doesn't have the juice for that. But
Yeah.
you know, being in an air sign or in an earth sign is something at least.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Mm.
Mercury.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like we said, Mercury, because Mercury is both it's sticking with Virgo for a second, right? Mercury is both in domicile and exalted in Virgo. And we
Yes.
talk about that, especially in the exaltation episode. Like, what does it mean that Mercury exalts themself? And so that means that in Pisces, Mercury is both in detriment and fall. So we've already talked about Mercury in Pisces in the detriment episode. But I guess the nuance there would be that it would really not have resources being in detriment, and then it would also struggle from a lack of reputation being in fall. So there's like a way that
A
Mercury
duality of
communicates.
both.
Yeah, it's like there's a way that Mercury communicates in Pisces where they're not resourced to be doing, you know, their communication, word, logistics things, and then people might also look poorly upon them for the way they do communicate or do Mercury things.
I keep thinking about what
Yeah.
water does to like speed and speech. It's like Mercury wants to go fast and it's very, you know, you're like in water, so you're like slowed down, and you're also like when you're underwater, like it all slows down and becomes very muffled. And you know, all of the water signs are like the quiet signs, right? The mute signs. And so when you have um a Mercury in a water sign, but then also like a water sign with the Jupiterian dispersal
Mm. It just gets kind
makes
of
it.
lost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like your
it's-
logistics just float away and dissolve
Yeah.
into the ocean. And you're like, where was my schedule? It's like
Mm-hmm.
literally like
Yeah.
a mushy pile of paper.
Yeah, I think about
Yeah.
someone like Einstein, you know, who like
Mm.
had a had a genius but couldn't like brush his hair, or like, you know, the very
Hmm.
like the absent-minded professor, like just so focused on one thing that everything else is kind of chaos.
Well, and Einstein
Yeah.
has Sun in Pisces, and
That's
so
right.
he does not have Mercury in Pisces.
Oh,
I
interesting.
think it might be Aries. I was looking. One of you can look that at that. That would
I'm
be
on it.
awesome because he's so Mercury. But there is a genius energy to Pisces, and then even though Einstein doesn't have Mercury in Pisces, I feel like sticking with that like genius thought and taking it to fall, that can be another thing of like when you're acting in ways that are not societally expected or not
Yeah.
normal for society, you might have crazy breakthroughs. You know, if you think like everybody
Mhm.
Yeah.
else, then you're probably not going to get to like the new next level of awareness. But Mercury and Pisces might actually, like thinking differently,
Yeah.
can definitely bring in genius energy.
Mhm.
Well, and I attract a lot of people with Mercury and Pisces. Just I have so many people in my life with that placement, and I've just found like so many of them are geniuses, but they don't have the words to like make it make sense to other people. And so it almost feels like they feel very trapped in their own heads. And my college boyfriend had his Mercury in Pisces, and I found that like if I came to him and was like, "Hey, we have this issue," he would get really defensive, like the Aries would come out. It was like very like, "No, no, we don't." Like we had to play this game, but I found that if I just wrote letters, then I could give like 3 to 5 business days for him to like process those thoughts and emotions and then write a letter. And then that was super helpful. And I started kind of adopting that with everybody else I knew who had um Mercury and Pisces too, because like Pisces is the deep ocean, right? Like, and I say this a lot, but like, what is in there? We don't know what's in there, and so like,
Monster soup. It's
there's
monster soup in there.
it's monster soup. Like, there's so much going on in there that like, of course, like all of the answers to the whole world might be in there, but like they don't know how to communicate it. Like we can't see it, and so like that's why they make such great like poets and musicians and stuff, but it's not going
Mhm.
to be like a musician that everyone's going to agree with. It's not going to be somebody that everybody like loves. It's going to be someone that like you either love or hate, right? Like you have
Mhm.
a reaction to. And that's what I've noticed about like all of my Pisces Mercury friends is that like they often have a really hard time saying what's on their mind, but when they do, they almost follow it up with like, "Oh, but it's okay if you don't agree with me." Like they get very like that's just something I've noticed. They get very like,
Mm.
"Don't hit me for saying that." Like they always
Mhm.
have this like movement to them. And I'm like, "Oh, no, I like that thought." And then they're always like surprised, like, "Oh, you do?" Like, can I come out of my shell? And it's so interesting because I think about that a lot. Like, how many people have disagreed with you? Like, how many people fight you? Because probably a lot.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about Maya Angelou's chart a lot with Mercury and Pisces. And I
Oh
mean, she
yeah.
has Venus in Pisces as well, and that can be a remediating factor, right?
Mm,
Exalted Venus is going to
sure.
help. And then she's like such an incredible poetic artist. But then
Yeah.
it's in the eighth house. She's a Leo rising. So the things she talks about are very like difficult in nature, very
Mhm.
eighth house.
Mm.
But then because her Mercury has that exalted Venus there, and then she also has Sun, Jupiter, and Aries, so she has like a rejoicing, exalted Sun. in the ninth,
Yeah.
so she was able to achieve status and like the exaltation of like her Venus and Sun. So she was still so visible, but still communicating in a way that is very countercultural, like saying what needs to be said about things that a lot of people would rather you probably just don't talk about and things like that.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Moon?
I've noticed that a
Anything
lot
else
for sure.
with Mercury?
I don't think so.
Cool. Fallen moon. I mean, I was thinking about this when we were talking about Mars, is it's really interesting that Mars is in fallen Cancer and then the moon is in fallen Scorpio. And there's this really difficult relationship between both of those planets. And then, going off of also, that class I was tuned into earlier today talking about Mars and how there is something like when Mars is directed properly, like Mars is blood and blood is life. And so there is something where like you need the body, but you need the blood flowing through the body for you to actually be alive. The moon's the body and Mars is the blood. But then if you don't, like the Orphics have their hymn where they're like binding and containing Mars for specific energy. Whereas if you don't like direct it very well, then it can like Mars can be really hard on the body, war and conflict and anger and aggression and fighting are not necessarily things that like the moon and your body are going to do well with. So it's like, yeah, moon and Scorpio is just, I feel like the people I know in the nativities I've seen with that are like, they're like really hard workers to the detriment of their bodies a lot of times.
Yes. And very like secretive about everything too. Like
Literal
they,
vault.
yes, like you can't get anything out of them, and they care so much about privacy and which like sure, valid, makes sense, but yeah, I have one particular good friend who I always joke about this. She has Scorpio moon and she's a Taurus rising, so it's in her seventh. And I can't get her to open up about anything. Like every time we do meet up to catch up, she will just keep asking me questions. And then after like an hour, I'll be like, have you talked? Like, have you said anything besides asking a question? So then I'll start asking questions or try to deflect it. And she is so good at just being like, oh no, like, haha, that's cute. What about you? Like, like just twisting words to like
So
ask
private.
me so private. And I'm like, wow, I don't know anything about you. Like,
Yeah.
will you talk? Like, yeah, it's so funny to me how they, and I've noticed it in other people too, but
and in a way that
yeah.
hits different than other Scorpio placements. Like all Scorpio placements are private, but I
Yes.
feel like there's something about Scorpio moons that take it to the next
Yes.
level.
Well, because that's the hidden, that's like
Yes.
their hidden realm, their room, their house, like
Yeah.
the private. My spouse and my best friend are both Scorpio moon, and something I've noticed that I can identify with a little bit as a Scorpio rising is like almost a pessimism, like a like a tendency to, if not careful, assume the worst of circumstance, of people. Um, and again, that comes from the association of struggle with circumstance and like our, the moon being our day to day
Yeah.
life,
And
the
also
most
just like,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
like not wanting people to see certain aspects of you. Like if you are going through something, feeling this like almost embarrassment, I guess, that like
The shame and Scorpio are very like I feel like shame is a
shame.
very scorpionic. It's not limited to
Yeah.
Scorpio, but very scorpionic.
No. It is, and it's like a fear of people actually seeing you or a fear of actually like being known or being understood. So instead it just goes so far in the other direction. It's just like, oh my God, nobody can know anything about me. And it just kind of like shuts down.
Well, because the moon, like kind of riffing off of me saying that it's the like more private than other Scorpio placements. It's like because the moon's
Yeah,
your most tender, it's like the most tender pieces of you. So then if it's in that
sure.
scorpionic waters, it's like you really want to
Yeah.
hold that close and protect that. Like Scorpio is very protective. It's
Mhm.
armored, the scorpion is very armored. Um, and then also a lot of times Scorpio moons can be very internal processors. So they might
Right,
really
right.
need to kind of withdraw and go inwards, right? If you pour
Yeah.
water on the earth, it goes down and in. And so a lot of times Scorpio moons, like they might also just not even know how to express it or feel the need to be expressing it because it's all being kind of
Yeah,
digested. Like the
I was
moon
gonna
is
say
digestion. It's like
they
in
don't know.
here. Or they
Yeah,
do
Well,
know, but it's just in there. It's
yeah.
deep.
Well, they might not know. It's what I'm trying to say. Like they probably know, but they might not know, or they don't know how
Depends.
to tap
Yeah.
into it yet, or that could come with
That's
age too.
totally.
Yeah.
and an intensity that we tend to like not we tend to shy away from, um again, in like broader cultural terms, like
Hmm.
there are things that we don't talk about, and there are things, and Scorpio kind of
Mhm.
loves all those things.
Hmm.
And
Well, and sorry, go ahead.
well, and just like our relationship to Scorpio again has a lot to do with how we relate to emotion and how it's expressed and should be expressed. And like
Yeah.
we expect a certain amount of emotional control or superficiality or
Yeah.
something. And Scorpio is very intense and often told that it's too much.
Hmm. And
Yeah.
very raw,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
very
Well,
dark.
and Scorpio rules poop, right? And so it's like that's
Hmm.
how I like to think of it. It's like it's not pretty. Like
Hmm.
you don't talk about it. You don't want that out there. You don't want
Mm-hmm.
people to see that. So it
Yeah.
can just internalize it literally, right? Like holding it
Yeah.
in. And
And,
then also, oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, also, I think of the fixed signs as like, what would they do if you put them in a box? So to me, like
Mhm.
Scorpio is like fixed water. How do you fix water? You freeze it, right? It's a block of ice. So to get ice to melt, to open up to you, you have to warm it up. You have to make it trust you, basically.
Hmm. And, the moon has triplicity in water signs.
Mm-hmm.
The moon's very comfortable in the water. But, like, if the moon rules Cancer, and waters are emotions, the way the moon would prefer to move through emotions is the ebbing and flowing and the fluctuating. And like we talked about earlier with
Right.
Mars just crying and then moving through it. Then if you think
Mhm.
about the habitat or the environment that Scorpio provides, it's fixed water ruled by Mars. And so it's emotions that are not moving. It might be frozen. I also like to think of Scorpio as like a really deep lake, like Crater Lake. I
Yeah.
live in Oregon and it's like
Mm-hmm.
incredibly deep lake, like all in the same place and it's just like penetrating. Um, but it's water ruled by
Yeah.
Mars. Like Pisces
Mm-hmm.
is like feeling good emotions and like Jupiter and hope and belief and like Scorpio is like, yeah, the pessimism or the worst or like shame and angst and like these really difficult emotions that are fixed. They're hard to move through. So Scorpio moons can like really hold on to emotional wounds and emotional
Right.
difficulties and be really, the moon's covered with like impacts from craters. Like the moon is
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
incredibly impacted. And in Scorpio, it's just like being in scalding water.
Yeah. And not having the tools to move through it too is really like a huge
Mhm.
thing I think about. Like it's fixed. Like it's gonna sit there forever. It's gonna hold a grudge. It's gonna never forget the one time you burned it. Like
Mhm.
that's just it doesn't know any better. Because
Yeah, if the
it's
moon is
fear.
memory, it's like
Yes.
it's a warrior's memory. It's like everyone who ever crossed me is going in the you just made the list, bitch, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's not great for the moon, who's relational.
Right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
also, thinking of some of the Scorpio moon nativities I know, are really incredible athletes, like
Mm.
Mars and the athleticism, but they do it to the
Yes.
detriment, like intense skiers who will just
Yes.
like lose toenails
Mm.
and just be out. I mean, I'm also like this. I don't have Mars and my moon in Scorpio, but you're just like out there like harming your body in really extreme environments for a
Mm.
sport. could also be very moon and
Yeah.
Scorpio.
My Scorpio moon friend is like very physical, bodybuilder, art handler, like really the body really I think is a filter.
Hmm. And,
And
you know, if
that's
you have, oh, go ahead.
well, and that's just that feels very lunar too. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you have to comfort yourself in these sort of Martian ways through
Mhm.
endurance and
Yes.
tearing things
Type
down.
2 fun, not type 1 fun.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so I have a Fitbit. I track a lot of the
Mm,
stats that are on my phone. And like I have really bad insomnia. I don't sleep well, but I also track, like, if you look at my fitness, it's embarrassing almost. Like, it'll be like, you have tracked like 1 day and 7 active hours this this week or whatever. And it's just like, oops. But it like that's how I regulate, like
Mhm.
having that like Mars ruled moon and Mars on the ascendant in its fall, like those, like I relate to that. Like I get that energy where it's like you constantly have to get it out or it's going to be in and you don't want it in. So you're
Mhm.
just going to move. And
Like,
so, like, yeah, it's just movement, it's just
literally
constant.
sticking with your poop analogy, like it fits
Yes.
exactly with what you just said. Like you don't want to hold on to
Right.
that. Like you want to let it
Right.
through, but the moon in Scorpio might end up holding on.
mm-hmm.
Right. But then, like, continuing with that, it's totally a TMI conversation, but I have had conversations in readings with people who have heavy Scorpio or Scorpio moons, particularly about their bowel movement issues and problems that they've had, or like UTIs, or like yeast infections, or just like weird feminine issues or like periods that are all over the place. Just like I've had so many conversations about those things acting up
Mm,
in especially Scorpio moons, but like Scorpio placements in
Mhm.
general. And I've like had to have that conversation multiple times about how it is Mars and it needs to move through it. And if you are stagnating, if you're staying still, it has nowhere to go. Like it's just gonna sit there, like
Mhm.
literally, right? Until it's causing your body pain. And
well,
so, yeah, it's like so
yeah.
funny how many times I've had to have that conversation.
It's
Yeah.
like, when does the abundance of Venus become hoarding?
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
Sorry.
Mhm. No,
No, I
that's a good
love it.
point. Well,
Yeah, because
I
there's
feel like
such a like, especially that Jupiter energy adding to it too. Like there's such an like excess that can
mhm.
come.
Mm.
Well, do we have anything else to say about fall? I feel like this has been pretty thorough.
Mm.
Any
Oh,
final thoughts?
well, you and I, Alicia, met in a workshop about planets in detriment and fall.
Hmm.
And the the comparison was to this amazing book by Sadia Hartman called
Mm.
Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments. And I really do think that that book, besides being just an amazing like document and like historical exploration of a period of time and a group of people I did not know much about. It's such a beautiful extended metaphor for planets in fall and um, how we treat them and how they express themselves. So
Hmm.
that was my thought.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the power of creating your own environments and communities where you
Yes.
can be supported in your own expression of like your life rather than like the broader over culture may not be too kind to you. So how do you create like havens with those around you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and how do you accept it too, I guess is a big thing. It's like if you have a planet in fall and you can acknowledge that that is an area of life that is going to be more difficult, or people are going to talk about it, or you know people are going to express their opinions on that thing. Well, then how can you work through not caring, or how can you mitigate that, or how can you
Hmm.
turn it into something or gain power from it, or like there's just
Hmm.
are a lot of options.
Yeah.
I was watching How to Train Your Dragon for the first time
Mhm.
Oh,
yesterday.
cute.
Cute.
And the premise is that he lives in this Viking community where they're always like
Mhm.
fighting the dragons, and then he gets an opportunity to kill a dragon, and he's like, I can't kill a dragon. He's like this like little wimpy guy surrounded by all these big Vikings, and there's just this line where one of the Vikings is to the main character, is like, stop trying to be someone you're not. And then he embraces it and befriends the dragon and shows the community there's other ways to interact with the dragons than just killing them. And I feel like that's such a good metaphor for like fallen and detriment planets, of like
Yeah.
he's not what his community or culture wants him to be or expects him to be, and that causes him a lot of suffering. But
Yeah.
if you can just like have the knowingness of like who you are, which astrology can really help illuminate. I mean, astrology is
Yeah.
not deterministic, right? Just because your chart says something, like you are like the captain of your ship, to
Yes.
go with it, astrological like ship helm references, even like you're in charge of your life. But like astrology can illuminate a lot of patterns and things
Mhm.
in your life and give clarity. And then if you can have that knowingness, either just through living your life, perhaps through astrology, perhaps through many different avenues, then you can actually be yourself, and actually like not try to
Yeah.
be something you're not.
Yeah.
And there's a TikToker I really like too that was just talking about something. She's a Hellenistic astrologer as well. And she made a comment that sometimes your chart will say or tell a story that only happens once. And you just have to remember that it's a story that only happens once. And for some reason, like, just that really resonated with me. I really liked the way she like worded that. And I kept thinking about it because I was like, huh, I mean, she's right. Like, because we can turn that part of our life into a pattern and keep attracting it, and then just be like, oh, like, I attract horrible bosses, right? Abusive bosses or abusive relationships or whatever. Or it could be the story of the one abusive boss or the one abusive relationship you had, but then you turned around and started a business, right? Like, to go with my example, or like,
Mm.
it could be something that could have been a pattern, but if you take control of it, it could have just been something that was a one-time story. So yes, I mean, most things in your chart like are gonna happen, but you can typically like take control over it and make sure it doesn't happen again, or you can lessen the blow if you see it by transit or other timing techniques in advance and stuff like that. And I think talking about detriment and fall planets are a great place to like talk about that and say that, because like, yeah, societal norms might go against who you
Mm.
are or what you're seen as, but like, you know who you are, and you can not care, or like, you can choose to become a hero because you prove to everybody that the dragons aren't going to hurt you. Like, dragons are friends. Like, you can kind of like take that fate into your own hands too. It's that whole fate versus fortune conversation
Yeah.
again. But
Well, that's what I'm thinking as you say all of this, is like this is just
Mhm.
opening up a whole can of worms of like fate versus free
Fate versus
will,
free will.
and all of like can we influence our fate? Like how much does free will
Mm.
influence that? And I feel like if you asked me on any given day, I would have a different answer to that.
Oh,
And it's like such a big conversation, like in the world and in astrology, is like how much can you influence your fate or not? But
Well, yeah,
yeah, that is an interesting.
fate might be hard to change, but so is a pattern. So is a
Mhm.
habit.
yes. Yes.
And also like from an ancient perspective, like we're not supposed to just like win at everything and have everything be good and easy. And like there's some things
Right.
that'll be strengths and flow well for you in your life, and there's some things that'll just be difficulties, and being able to embrace that, work with that,
Yeah.
not
That's life.
expect like the world handed to you on a silver platter. But also like really holding space for detriment and fallen planets can speak to incredibly difficult life experiences and incredible, like literally the word adversity and depression, that Chris Brennan has here. And it's just like that's real too. And a lot of times those things can be put on you by society and like you don't deserve it and it's just not right, but it's like what reality is. And
Yeah.
these planets can
Yeah.
really speak to that.
Yeah, and everyone's got something too. And I've been saying that since I was a kid. Like everyone has something that hurts them or bothers them, or like everyone has strengths and everyone has weaknesses. And I feel like that kind of filters back into that whole like just be kind conversation. You never know what anybody's going through on any given day, but like everyone is going through something almost always. Like even if it's just mundane stress, like everybody's going through something. So like just that kindness and like holding space for those areas of life that might cause you a little more strife, whereas celebrating and accepting that there's other areas of life that aren't going to be that way for you.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah, looking for the strengths in your
Yeah.
chart can really help you focus on the good when the bad seems like too much to deal with.
Yeah.
Well, beautiful. Yeah, Hannah, thank you so much again for being on this with us. This
Yeah.
episode will come out this Friday. Do you want to share a little of what's like going on in your world, what you're up to?
I'm in the studio for the next about 5 weeks, preparing for a show. So
Yay.
yeah, I'm in hermit mode. I'm very excited. So
Whoa.
it's nice to get a little astro chat in.
Yes. Nice little Virgo season, hermit
Mm-hmm.
hermit
Hermit
times.
mode.
Very that. Yeah. How about y'all?
Love it.
Well, Lori and I are going to Greece in
Oh
a
man,
week.
that's right.
We'll be
So
there
that'll
this time
be
next week.
literally. So yeah,
Wow.
I'm just really excited to ground into
Yeah.
the like land where so many of these myths come from and go to these sacred places. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun stuff to share on the podcast when we get back. And other than that, I like my books are still open on my website if you want. I do asteroid astrology readings, herbal astrology readings. I do regular topical astrology readings. I'm also an herbalist who blends teas for people, personalized herbal teas. And I do a lot of writing and research about various herbs. So I have lists of, learning more about rosemary or calendula or cayenne pepper. So you can check that all out on my website, which all of our information is linked down below. And yeah, what are you up to, Lori?
Still writing. Been writing a lot, been trying to edit through some things. Yeah, still collecting a lot of asteroid stories, doing a lot of asteroid work. But then otherwise, yeah, just kind of setting into packing and cleaning and getting ready to go to Greece. And I've been just really trying to steep myself into as much as the myth as I possibly can, just so I feel like really extra connected to these spaces. And yeah, just all those
Beautiful.
things. And yeah, and then me and Amy Angelo are going to start a asteroid, it's called the Surge with NCGR. So we're going to be starting like a asteroid research group.
Awesome. Do you guys have any links
Yeah.
or anything to that yet if people want to get involved?
We're going to post I think we're announcing it on September 23rd. We've already kind of elected a date for that. And yeah, we're looking at
Fun.
kind of starting a whole little research group.
Dope.
Awesome. So I guess if people want to get involved with that, they can just tune into NCGR and more
Yes.
info will be coming out September 23rd.
Yeah, it'll
Very
come out
cool.
with them, and we're not 100% sure how everything is going yet. So once it gets
Mhm.
announced, all of the information will be there.
So exciting.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
super
thanks
fun.
everyone for listening. Yeah.
Thanks
Yeah.
for
bye.
having me.